Ladies and gentlemen of the Cover Killer Nation, it is time for me to review not one but two albums in the same video. This is something I've only done a couple of times. In fact, there was that one time last month where I reviewed 3 albums in one video and somehow got it under 10 minutes, I think. I don't remember. But at any rate, this is very important because one album is from a year in the past and one is from the present. In fact, it was one that was just released recently, in fact this past Tuesday, and I believe in the United States we may be getting this about a week late or something like that. It still hasn't arrived at the store, so however we are going to get a copy, which I'm excited for because then I'm going to own both of these albums finally. It's the Road Salt Duality, or the Road Salt 2 album set by Pain of Salvation, and Road Salt Part 1 was released last year. In fact, it was released last year in the springtime. I can remember having the album. And Road Salt Part 2 is the one that was just released. Now, the first thing that you're probably wondering is, what is Road Salt all about? Is this like a 2-part concept album? And Daniel Gillendahl has really indicated that it's really not meant to be seen as a concept album. However, it does have a central theme of decisions. And you can tell that there are various stories in here, various decisions that are being made by the people that are presented in the songs, the characters, if you will. And the only thing that's keeping this from being a concept album is that it's not one revolving conceptual storyline, as opposed to what it really is, which is multiple. The music that Pain of Salvation has made ever since the beginning of their career has taken a very radical change ever since the release of B. B came out in the middle part of the 2000s and really started to divide listeners up a little bit because they went very orchestral. They really examined the concept and idea of God and the presence of Him, whether or not He's actually there. There was a lot of philosophical questions in that album. They used orchestration and they used different arrangements than the progressive metal stylings that the band's fans were really used to from albums such as Entropia, 1 Hour by the Concrete Lake, The Perfect Element Part 1, and Remedy Lane. So the diversion started with B and continued onward with Scarsick, which some fans consider to be somewhat of a weak or a letdown album. Now with Road Salt 1 and 2, this is a band that continues to evolve, and they used a couple of different stylings here whenever it comes to recording. Road Salt Part 1 is more revolved around jamming, and it's something that is very present on the album because you kind of get this feel like the band just sat around and they kind of had some ideas in mind, but at the same time they wanted to free flow and see where the ideas would go with the entire band. It's a very band-oriented 2-part affair between both albums. However, Road Salt Part 1 definitely has that more solid, jam-filled atmosphere on it, and is a little bit more devoid of the progressive metal tendencies that you've heard on the Pain of Salvation earlier work, which of course is what a lot of fans are still clamoring for. You're going to get that a little bit more with Road Salt 2. Road Salt 2 has a little bit more of the stylings that you recall. However, it's a funny combination because whenever I hear some tracks, it reminds me of the progression that I heard on some songs on Scarsick, which call back to The Perfect Element Part 1, since it's considered and supposed to be Part 2 to that concept, considering it does contain a lot of the same ideas that The Perfect Element really posed and kind of started off with. These are 2 albums where the second part, Road Salt Part 2, which was just released, is a darker side. This is a side that, even though the music itself might not seem as though it's spawned from hell itself or anything like that, there's a little bit more of a darker element to it, whereas there was a lighter mood on Road Salt Part 1. The storylines were still very touching, but at the same time there were still little characteristics that were a little bit more comical, a little bit more direct, a little bit more chauvinistic even. You know, there was a line in there about you'd be surprised how easy it is to clean off semen off of a leather seat, or something along those lines. It's a very interesting line, to say the least. With Road Salt Part 2, the darker element is also perceived in a little bit more of a heartbroken element, almost as though Road Salt Part 1 is the questions being posed in the person's mind. You know, the situation is being posed. And in Road Salt Part 2, the decision has been made, it has been finalized, and now they're living and dealing with the repercussions. And it seems like more often than not, the repercussions have been negative. You're going to hear a lot of music within these 2 parts that are very similar in nature. almost as though they are connecting the stories. That interconnectivity is something that's very nice. It may be something that amongst the first listen you think to yourself, well, wait, they're just rehashing or reprising a previous idea. Reprise or reprise, whichever you prefer to say. You might be like, well, that's kind of nice. It's a progressive, idea, but where's some of the creativity? I mean, there could be a little bit more creativity there. They could have done a little bit more with it. Personally, I think this is something that is necessary to bind the stories together and kind of give it a little bit more of a finalized character. It makes you feel as though, not so much that there's resolution, but at least the two connect together. Overall, Road Salt Part 1, by many fans, was considered an improvement over Scarsick. Scarsick for me was an album where it grew on me, where it really required a lot of listens, but I still only had my favorite songs. Other songs were, to me, just utter garbage. Road Salt Part 1 is very much more a complete effort, and the jam-style atmosphere actually builds a lot more character to this band. Character that a lot of classic progressive and metal fans will kind of distance themselves from. However, they're channeling back the past a little bit, which is a very nice touch. With Road Salt Part 2, they get a little bit more of that darker element, but they're still kind of doing this in a little bit more of a more accessible, almost more of a progressive rock avenue as opposed to a progressive metal avenue. And that's something that some hardcore fans may dislike. However, Road Salt 2, compared to Road Salt 1, is the superior album. This is an album that blends a lot more dynamic harmony. It's something that has a lot more character to it. And the darker side and the more bleak side, the reflection of Daniel's vocals where it's very kind of sombre, is something that Pain of Salvation has always done and has always been one of the best bands in the genre at doing. And considering you get to hear it a lot more on Road Salt 2, a lot more conventional fans will be extremely pleased. Overall, this duality, if I were to score the both, is a solid 8. And this is something where listening to it all the way through is a unique atmosphere. And you know what? It's only about 103 minutes of music unless you got the limited editions of both, of which case it's going to be up to 125 or so. So, less than 2 hours, you can dedicate that to Pain of Salvation, and I definitely recommend that you do so. Pick up Road Salt 2 if you already have Road Salt 1. If you don't have either of them, get them both. These are strong albums, and Pain of Salvation fans, if you open your mind a little bit, you'll be pleased.